As we're about to approach Rosh Hashanah, we can reflect on the tefillah, on the prayer experience we're about to have. And I think we can reflect upon the structure of the Mussaf, the central prayer of the Rosh Hashanah experience. And in Mussaf, we break up the tefillah into three sections called Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot. In Malchiyot, we essentially are embracing God's kingship. Zichronot is about remembering the past, and Shofarot is about the sound of the shofar. Hayom Harat Olam, that this is the day of the birthday of the world. Not only was the world created, but that we, as humans, as the pinnacle of creation, were created on this day to reaffirm our purpose of creation, and thus the entirety of the purpose of creation. It says in the Talmud, in Rosh Hashanah 34b, and also in the Tosefta, Rosh Hashanah 111, that Malchiyot, this first section of Mussaf, is about making God king, making sure that we submit ourselves to this deep theological truth that there is one ultimate power that is in control of the world. Now, some of us may say we believe in God, but a functional atheism operates when we actually believe that all of the work is upon us. And so the first step is a humility of stepping back and saying, I am not God. I am not in control of the world. Someone, something, some being way beyond us is actually the creator and in control of the world. That's the beginning of the tefillah. Then is zichronot, as the Talmud goes on, that our remembrances, the remembrances of what God has created and put in place, and what humans and Jews in particular have put in place, that those remembrances should rise before God. And then thirdly is shofarot, that rising up happens through the shofar. Normally we think of the shofar as something that calls us inward, a spiritual alarm clock that awakens us within the recesses of our soul, within the depths of our being. But here we see shofar as a transcendental force, not a force of immanence, that transcends the self, transcends the world, to bring those zichronot, those remembrances, up towards God. In the Sifrei B'Midbar 77, in this midrash, we see a different explanation of the beginning. Malchiyot, the kingship, is the beginning of Mussaf, to be makaba al mochut shamayim, to accept upon ourselves the weight of God's kingship. And then through zichronot, once we've embraced that, then to seek mercy, rachamim, through the past, through the righteous deeds of our ancestors, through the promises and the covenants, the britot that have been made. We can then ask God for mercy based upon not our own successes, not our own virtues, but upon that shared history and collective memory. And finally, shofarot, that the sound of freedom emerges after we have called upon those mercies. The cherut, the freedom that emerges through a celebratory shofar, not an internal alarm clock of divine immanence, not the transcendence of the shofar to rise up our tefillot, to bring our prayers towards the thrones of glory, but ultimately as a sound of celebration and of freedom. And that midrash continues that ultimately God will be the one to blow the shofar. So those are two ideas in Chazal and the sages around the order of Mussaf. I want to share one other view. Rav Yosef Albo explains that, and Rosenzweig to it in a different degree, explains that these brachot, the alignment of these blessings, actually represent the core of emunah, the core of our understanding of Jewish faith. And I want to unpack that for just a moment. Malchiyot, why would you start here? This is about the future, about the world to come, the oneness that we often can't see, the oneness of God, the oneness of humanity, the oneness of all existence, that we can't see because of fragmentation, because of brokenness, right? Has to come first, to keep our eyes on the prize as we start this prayer. In fact, the shofar blasts are sandwiched as wholeness, brokenness, wholeness. You have tekiyah, a whole sound, tekiyah. You have brokenness of shivarim, the brokenness of truah, and then once again the wholeness of tikiyah. You have wholeness, brokenness, wholeness. Starting with Malchiot to understand that at the end of days, in the redemption we're working towards, is the oneness, the wholeness that we are constantly striving for. But then we go backwards to Zichrono, to the past. We go back to the past to actually find our source of optimism. Where today in dark times can we find light? Where can we find hope, faith, optimism for the future? Actually by looking at the past. Because, for example, Steven Pinker, one of my teachers, who's a psychology professor at Harvard, teaches that there is less violence in the world today than ever before in history. That actually we are in a state of progress. Just look at the state of medicine, technology, that we are progressing as humanity. Maybe our human nature is not progressing, but the systems that we live within are most certainly progressing. There is a negative or pessimistic view of history that emerges from Jewish theology called the Yeridat Hadorot, that we are in a constant state of decline. But there's another called Or HaMashiach, that we are moving towards a state of redemption, and that should ultimately give us hope. That the world is progressing, that halakha, which can translate as progress, moving forward, is a vehicle, our Jewish vehicle, for ultimately moving forward. And then lastly, shofarot, that now we are called to be present. In Malchiot, we were called to look to the ideal future. In Zichronot, we're called to look to the past, to gain optimism, to move forward. And shofarot is about calling us, commanding us to be present. Radical amazement, radical presence in this moment. The shofar says, block out your thoughts and your feelings, but be radically present in the sound of freedom. And so the Baal Shem Tov says, every day we should ask ourselves, Ayeka, where are you? Where are you? And here we learn from Mussaf of something fundamental about the Jewish theological approach to progress. That we keep our eyes on the prize of what the world can look like, a world without suffering and injustice and oppression, a world without sadness and loneliness and alienation from ourselves, from other people, from all existence, from God. And then ultimately, zichronot, to look to the past, to realize how far we have come, and that we are ultimately on a trajectory towards progress. And then to shofarot, the pinnacle of all spirituality, which is radical presence, filling ourselves with gratitude, with hope, with faith, with meaning, that actually life has an order to it, a meaning to it. And this Rosh Hashanah, as we're in the prayer, we should hold on to those principles of faith, that we've come from somewhere, we are headed somewhere, and each of us is needed for this work. May this Rosh Hashanah, we be reminded of our own unique potential, our own unique task to bring redemption to the world. Shana Tova.